My name's Gene Saunders. I'm the Southeast Asia club fitting manager. So today we're going to have a little bit of a chat about wedge fitting. Everybody understands, I think, the value of driver fitting, fairway fitting, iron fitting. The knowledge of golfers in the past few years with the likes of the internet, golf magazines, has really on a dramatic upscale in terms of their equipment, what they need, which is fantastic. Wedges also in the terms of bounce and sole design they need, but I think if there's anywhere that perhaps it may be a little bit behind in some of the other sections is what type of wedges players need, and how those wedges need to be different to the rest of their set. It's not so much that if your lie angle is a certain thing in your irons, it's not necessarily going to be the same in your wedges, because they're different tools, they're multi-purpose tools, and we use them for different things. So we want to make sure not just that you have the right bounce, you have the right sole design. For a player that tends to play with the club square a lot, and tends to take a little bit of a divot, sometimes the relief on the back of the club that we have, for some of our sole grinds, we have the 5 different sole grinds, isn't needed so much. Then we get the other guy who likes to open it up a lot, and he tends to shallow it out a lot. That guy, quite often we want to look at some relief for him, not just in his most lofted wedge, in his next wedge down. So it's suiting this, not just the bounce, but also the sole grind to the player, lie angle, length, and also shaft. I think with wedges, a lot of the time, the traditional 52, 60, the 56 in the middle maybe isn't as relevant as it has been in the past. If we look at wedges from a lot of companies, or even models within certain companies, we see a lot of stronger wedge lofts out there now. So if we have, say, a 45 or a 44 degree pitching wedge, and you've gone with your traditional 52, all of a sudden you've got an 8 degree gap there in your wedges, and then 4, 4, 4, and what you'll probably find is a big gap in distance between those clubs. Now, when 60–70% of the golf that we play is inside 100 yards, so we want to make sure if there are any gaps, they're certainly not in our scoring zone down in the wedges. So we've brought out 46, 48, 50 degree wedges to find that gap in between, and we're finding a lot of different setups now. We see a lot of 50, 54, 58s. We also need to be careful of the design of the club. If we go from, say, an AP2 or an AP1, which are designed a lot more with distance and forgiveness in mind, into a Vokey, which is very much about precision and control. Not the others aren't, but these are really about control especially. We sometimes find that the gaps aren't always even 4, 5, 6 degrees like they may be in the wedges. We might need to go a little bit less sometimes to have, say, a 47, 50 to get the gappings, maybe the 8, 10, 12 metres, whatever the player has throughout the rest of their set. So it's, I think, more or so now than ever, it's very important to make sure we have the right gapping, and generally the first area that we'll go through after we have a little bit of an interview with our players to find out what their tendencies are, what they're looking for in their wedges, is go through and get the gappings right for them, work out whether they need to be a 3 wedge player or a 4 wedge player, and from there we can start to build it up based on what else they've got in their set and for their individual needs. What we'll generally start out with for the wedge fitting is a player interview. We want to find out what the players' tendencies are, what clubs they currently have in their bag, what their good shots are, what their bad shots are. We want to get to know a little bit about them and their game before we get started, which helps us to make the correct decisions for them as we go through their bag. So generally, once we've done that, and we'll have a little bit of a chat, we'll get the player to hit their wedges, have a little bit of look at the gappings and the distance gappings they have there. Also a little bit how their wedges perform in terms of bounce, lie angle, things like that. We're looking at what the ball flight's doing. Then from there we would go ahead and make some recommendations on what we might like to see, and then go ahead and test that. Of course, using TrackMan for all our fittings, particularly for our distance controls. It helps us, from that way it's not just based on opinion. We can really give some nice facts, and the players are able to see the data there for themselves and make their own decisions on it in conjunction with our recommendations. Okay, so when we're doing our fittings, we use all our SM4 wedges. So we like to have all 21 options of our wedges there, and we also like to have our 3 different finishes in our oil can, our black nickel and our tour chrome, to give the players the most information we can to best make their decision on what they might like to do. So we have 21 different options. We have quite a few bounce options, we have quite a few sole options. So, for us, we measure our bounce in effective bounce. So the bounce angle is, if we look at the back edge of this wedge versus the front edge, we can see that the back edge is is a little higher than the front edge. So what that allows us to do with a club like with our wedges, we tend to hit down on them a lot, so that back edge gives us a little bit of relief as we hit down, and it'll work its way through the turf for us. If we have too much bounce, we'll see it hit and pop up, not enough and we see it dig. So from there, how we choose the correct bounce for the player is depending on that player's individual style. We'll see some guys that what we call a digger. So they tend to take pretty big divots. They tend to use if they don't have the right type of wedge, the right type of bounce, the front edge a lot and dig in. We'll have the other type is a slider. The guys that don't tend to take much divot, they tend to just pick it off the top a little bit. And you know, if we have too much bounce for those guys, it'll bounce up into the ball and they'll hit it thin and off it goes. And then of course we have the guys in the middle, or sometimes, you know, throughout their wedge set, guys might be a little bit of both. We need to look at what's good for their best shot, what helps them out a little bit with their miss, and that can help us leaning sometimes that way in the bounce. The width of the sole has an effect on the effective bounce. The wider the sole, the more time it has to act on the turf. So the wider the sole, you know, the more the bounce will play on it. You know, also the camber, how much curve we have on the sole. More camber equals less bounce because we have less effective area again. And then also, you know, depending on after that, we want to look at the sole design as well. Is the player tending to be somebody that likes to open the face up a lot, or add loft to their club and try and slide it underneath with their more lofted clubs, and sometimes, you know, their two most lofted wedges? If that's the case, we want to look at something that gives them a lot more relief around the back, towards the heel or towards the toe. For the guys that like to play it a lot squarer, we don't need that as often. Sometimes we only need that maybe in their most lofted wedge, and if we do, we might need it a lot less than other guys, which I guess will bring us along to the type of bounces that we want to, type of grinds that we want to look at. So I have in my hand here like our 58 degree 5809, which is our S grind. For this guy, you can see it's got a little bit of relief around the back, quite a bit out of the heel here for the guys that, so this would be for your moderate to slider type of player who likes to loft it up there a little more when he gets into his more lofted clubs. This is our L grind. So if we have a look at this guy compared to our S, you can see we've got a lot more relief in the heel. We've got a lot more relief around on the toe there too, and a little bit of a narrower sole area. So if we combine all those things, that adds up to a less effective bounce as to what we had before. So the guy who really likes to slide it, he's going to be looking at something like this, whereas if we had somebody who likes to play pretty square most times, which is probably more indicative of what the sort of shots we'll see in our 48, 50, 52 degrees. You know, we can see here, this is our F grind, so our full grind, where we don't really need to open that one up, so there's no need for us to really put too much relief on there. We want to use the full width of the bounce to get the best out of it. We also have our probably most popular grind is the M grind. So this guy here, M, you know, gives us a nice moderate amount of bounce. Also gives us some relief in the heel and the toe. So I guess it gives us the greatest versatility, the best of both worlds. I think that appeals to a lot of players, suits a lot of players. And then we probably look at sometimes into more of our specialties, maybe our T and our L grinds, where we get a lot more for the players that tend to slide it. We see those only in our high lofted clubs. So in our T grind here in a 6207, we can see that the bounce area, the sole area is quite narrow. We have a lot of relief here, so the player can really open that wedge up. They can really, you know, add some loft, lean the shaft back if they want, and they're not going to have to worry about the bounce maybe overtaking it and kicking it up for them. So for the guy that likes to loft it, if you've got a 62 in your hand, you probably do. So it's going to work really well for that guy. Okay, so as we spoke a little bit about earlier, when it comes time to do the gapping for the players and using the TrackMan, we'd have the TrackMan set up down the target line here. We'll get the player to hit with their clubs. Of course, we want to test first with theirs. We'll probably get them to hit, you know, sometimes 2 or 3, sometimes up to 5 balls, depending on how comfortable the player is with the consistency of their strike, and also, I guess, myself or our other fitters, they feel they've got the information they need. From there, what we'll do is we'll work our way through the set, get some yardages, and then we want to work on making sure we have the right type of gapping for the player, and also helping them maybe with some advice, some stuff that we see, and then converting from what we've seen and recommending wedges from there. From there, once we've done that, we'll also have a little bit of a look at the lie angle for the player. We'll get them to hit off a lie board. That also helps us out a little bit with their bounce. And then from there, we then take it, onto the turf. Most times, we'd ideally like to do it on turf, but turf's a tough commodity here in Singapore, so we tend to do a lot of the time, more often, on the mats or inside. It's a little more comfortable for the player. Go out and do our checks in the end on the turf, just to make sure that we've got it right and it's going to perform how we want to see it out on the course. So looking to hear that nice noise we want to hear, having a look at the divots, having a look at the ball flight, make sure we're getting the ball flights we want to see. Once we feel like we're comfortable with not only the gapping, the turf interaction, then we want to take it over to the bunker in the short game area, make sure that we have the right stuff over there. It's really important that we have a wedge, more often than not your most lofted wedge or your second most lofted wedge, or the two combination that you can use out of the bunker. That's sort of a must-have, so we want to make sure we have something that has the right amount of bounce for you and the right sole design from there.